Hey everyone, before we dive in, do me a favor, subscribe and hit the bell to make sure you don't miss a single word of this story. Drop a comment below and let me know what time it is where you are and which city you're watching from. Now let's get into it. I still hear the music sometimes. The low thrum of the bass, the clinking of glasses, the muffled laughter from the other side of the door. It's a ghost, a phantom limb that aches even though it's not there anymore. They say the most beautiful things often hide the ugliest secrets, and that place was a perfect example of that. We called it the Whispering Pine, and it was nestled high in the mountains, a haven for the kind of money that buys silence. The air was crisp, the views were breathtaking, and the patrons were always polite, their faces hidden behind a veil of expensive cologne and practiced smiles. We, the staff, had to follow 7 sacred rules, and breaking even one meant death. That's what they told us. I thought it was a joke, a dark bit of folklore to keep the new guys in line. Now I know it was a promise. My name is Tom, and I was a college dropout with a mountain of debt. I'd stumbled into this security gig, a way to earn some quick cash and disappear from a life I didn't want anymore. I was just a kid with a useless degree and a chip on my shoulder, trying to outrun a past I couldn't escape. The job was simple enough. Check IDs, deal with drunk patrons, and make sure no one wandered into the restricted areas. I was good at it, a silent sentinel watching the doors, but I was just another ghost in that place, haunting its hallways and serving its secrets. I didn't know it then, but this place, with all its serene beauty, was a cage. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless, and I was about to find myself trapped inside a true crime story that was about to turn into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The first rule was simple: always keep the keg room door locked. Not just latched, but locked with a key. It was a heavy steel door, painted a drab gray, a brutal scar on the otherwise rustic aesthetic of the place. It was always cold back there, the air smelling of stale beer and damp earth, a scent that clung to my uniform and haunted my nights. The bar itself, with its warm polished mahogany and roaring fireplace, was a stark contrast to that utilitarian space. That's where I was when I first heard it. A faint scraping sound, like a nail dragging across metal. I was doing my rounds, a routine I knew by heart, checking the storerooms and making sure everything was secure. The sound came from behind the keg room door. It was a quiet Tuesday night. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes outside, blanketing the mountains in a profound silence that the bar's music couldn't quite penetrate. A few patrons, the usual crowd of wealthy regulars, sat by the fire, their hushed conversations lost in the crackle of the burning wood. My colleague, a lanky kid named Leo, was restocking the bar. He had been there for a few weeks, a wide-eyed boy who believed the 7 rules were a quirky tradition. I told him they were more like a religion here. He just laughed, but his eyes held a flicker of unease. I remember looking at the door, the heavy metal handle, and the worn keyhole, and feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the freezing temperatures. That was the first time I felt it, the sense that something was wrong, something that went beyond a simple maintenance issue. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the cold steel. The scraping stopped. As suddenly as it had begun, the silence that followed was heavier than the scraping itself. I pushed the thought away, telling myself it was just the building settling, or maybe a rat. I went to the main office, a small, cramped room filled with old files and a flickering computer screen. The owner, a grim man named Silas, who never smiled, was reviewing security footage. He barely looked up when I walked in. I mentioned the noise. Just the wind, Tom, he said without looking at me. The mountains have a way of playing tricks on you. His words were a dismissal, but the way his knuckles were white as he gripped the desk told me he knew something more. The security monitor showed a grainy image of a hallway. I noticed the timestamp. It was from 3 nights ago. Any issues with the security cameras? I asked. Silas just shook his head, his eyes glued to the screen. I saw a quick, almost imperceptible flicker on the screen. A shadow that didn't belong. It darted across the hallway near the keg room, and then it was gone, leaving no trace. That night, one of the regulars, a man named Mr. Abernathy, went missing. He had been sitting by the fireplace all evening, sipping his scotch and reading a leather-bound book. 1 minute, he was there, a silent fixture of the room. The next, his chair was empty, his glass half full, the book lying open on the table. We searched the bar, the parking lot, the surrounding area. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints in the fresh snow, nothing. The police were called, but they were no help. They were used to people disappearing up here, chalking it up to a blizzard or a hiking accident. But I knew better. I'd seen that flicker, that fleeting shadow. I went back to the keg room door, my heart pounding against my ribs. I saw a tiny, almost invisible scratch on the door, a fresh mark that hadn't been there before. It was just a scratch, but it looked like a fingernail mark, deep and desperate. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear nothing but the faint, rhythmic hum of the refrigerators, but I had a feeling, a certainty that was chilling me to the bone. The 7 rules weren't a joke, and someone had already broken one. The second rule was about the patrons. We were never, under any circumstances, to check their IDs, ask their names, or question their stories. Their privacy was sacred. They came and went like ghosts, their faces a blur of expensive scarves and shadowed hats, after Mr. Abernathy vanished. This rule took on a new, sinister weight. The police had asked for a list of names, but Hylas, the owner, just shrugged. "We don't keep a register," he said, his voice flat. "It's a cash business. People come and go. It's what they pay for." The cops left, grumbling about a lack of cooperation, but I saw the relief on Silas's face. He knew something. I was certain. A few nights later, a young waitress named Sarah started acting strangely. She was usually a vibrant, talkative girl, full of energy and bad jokes. Now she was quiet, her movements stiff and jerky. Her eyes, normally a bright, sparkling blue, were dull and distant. She kept glancing at the keg room door, a look of abject terror on her face. I saw her talking to another waitress, her voice a low, frantic whisper. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I saw the other girl's face pale with fear. It was like a virus, a creeping dread that was infecting the staff. I went over to her, putting a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, her body tensing up. "Sarah, are you okay?" I asked. She just nodded, her eyes darting away from mine, but a single silent tear rolled down her cheek. Later, I found a small worn photograph on the floor near her station. It was of a young boy, maybe 7 or 8, his smile wide and genuine, a picture from her past, a reminder of a life she had outside of this place. I recognized the toy he was holding. It was a small plastic monster truck, the same kind I had when I was a kid. It was an unimportant detail, a small faded picture, but it felt like a clue, a piece of a puzzle I was desperate to solve. I slipped it into my pocket, the cold cardboard a small comfort in the growing darkness. I asked another staff member about her. "She's been off since she found that old newspaper clipping," they whispered, their eyes wide. "She found it in the back, in a box of old cleaning supplies. It was about a little boy who went missing 20 years ago." I decided to investigate the paper trail. I snuck into the back office after my shift when the bar was finally empty and Silas had gone home. The room was a mess of forgotten files and dusty archives. I found a box labeled incidents, and inside, a collection of old police reports and newspaper clippings. I found the article the waitress had mentioned. It was about a 7-year-old boy, Daniel Carter, who had vanished from a mountain trail 20 years ago. The picture in the newspaper was fuzzy, but the boy looked exactly like the one in the photo I'd found. I also found a strange, handwritten note attached to the article. It read, "He broke the rules. They always break the rules." A chilling realization washed over me. The disappearances weren't new. This wasn't an isolated incident. There was a history here, a pattern. I found another report, this one from 10 years ago. It detailed the disappearance of a woman named Eleanor Vance, a wealthy socialite who was last seen at the Whispering Pine. She had been found in the woods a few days later, but the report was vague about the details of her discovery. The note attached to her file was more specific. She saw what she shouldn't have seen. She broke the third rule. The rules, I realized, were not just for the staff. They were for everyone, and the price for breaking them was not just being fired. It was something far, far worse. I was startled by a sudden noise from the hallway, a faint whisper like a breath against my ear. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I heard my name, Tom. It was Sarah's voice, but it was hollow, devoid of life. I slowly turned to face the door. There was no one there, but the photo of the little boy was gone from my pocket. I had put it there myself. I was certain. I checked again. Nothing. A cold dread, a feeling of being watched, washed over me. I wasn't just investigating a crime anymore. I was inside it. I was a part of the story, a character in a horror movie I didn't want to be in. The rules weren't just a tradition, they were a contract, and I had just found a key to the past, a past that was not as buried as everyone wanted to believe. The third rule was the most baffling. Never look directly into the eyes of a patron for longer than 10 seconds. It sounded absurd, a whimsical decree from a paranoid owner, but after Sarah's disappearance, it felt like a warning. She was gone. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her purse was behind the bar, but Sarah herself had vanished. I told Silas everything about the note, the newspaper clipping, the photo. He listened, his face a mask of cold indifference. "You're letting your imagination get the best of you, Tom," he said, his voice flat. "Sarah probably just quit. She was a good girl, but she was always a little flighty." He said it like he was trying to convince himself, as much as me. But I saw the way his eyes lingered on the keg room door. He knew. I started to keep a closer eye on the remaining staff, on the few who hadn't fled the growing terror. There was Leo, the lanky bartender, and Maria, a tough, no-nonsense waitress who had been working there for years. Maria was a fountain of local legends and bar secrets. I cornered her in the kitchen, the smell of burnt grease and disinfectant hanging in the air.
"What do you know about the rules?" I asked, my voice low. "About the disappearances." She looked at me, her face pale, and then she let out a short, bitter laugh. "You don't want to know, kid," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's bad luck to talk about it." But I pressed her, showing her the old newspaper clippings. Her eyes widened in recognition. "They say the mountain itself is a hungry thing," she whispered. "It feeds on secrets. The rules are just a way to keep it from getting too greedy."
She told me about the history of the Whispering Pine, a history that wasn't in any of Silas's dusty files. The building had been a lodge before it was a bar, a retreat for the wealthy and the powerful. And even then, people went missing. They called it the mountain curse. The locals The old families that lived in the small town below believed in it. They spoke of a shifting presence in the woods, a thing that took the shape of what you most desired, what you most feared. It was a shape-shifting entity that didn't just take bodies, it took memories, identities. The rules, she explained, were not for our safety, they were for its. It was an elaborate system to keep the entity fed, to keep it from taking too much at once. One night, I was on my patrol, checking the perimeter. The snow had stopped, and the air was filled with a chilling quiet. I was passing by a window overlooking the back parking lot when I saw a woman sitting in a car, her face illuminated by the dim light of the dome light. She was one of our regulars, a woman with a kind face and a nervous disposition. She was clutching a small golden locket in her hands, a look of profound grief on her face. Her name was Mrs. Albright, and she had lost her husband a few months ago. He had been a regular at the Whispering Pine. I felt a pang of sympathy for her. This quiet woman, lost in her sorrow. I saw her look up, her eyes meeting mine through the glass. For a moment that stretched into an eternity. We just looked at each other. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I had broken the third rule. I felt a sudden, dizzying sensation, like the world was shifting around me. The light from the bar seemed to dim, the sounds of the music fading away. I saw a flicker in Mrs. Albright's eyes, a fleeting flash of something ancient and hungry. Her kind face seemed to melt, to twist into a grotesque parody of itself, a mask of something else. Then just as quickly, it was gone. Her eyes returned to normal, filled with tears and sorrow. But I knew what I had seen. I had seen the thing behind the mask. The locket she was holding, the one she had been clutching so tightly, was not a locket. It was a small, crudely carved wooden bird, the same bird that had been on the keychain of Mr. Abernathy. The first person to disappear. The bird was the connection. It was a key to a cycle of horror that had been repeating itself for decades. A deep chill settled in my bones. I wasn't just working at a bar. I was a witness, and now I was a target. The fourth rule was the one I saw broken most often: never go into the woods after sundown. It was a rule for the staff and the patrons alike. The woods were beautiful, a vast expanse of snow-dusted pines and silent trails. But after the sun dipped below the horizon, they became something else entirely. They became a maze of shadows and whispers. After Mrs. Albright's terrifying gaze, I started to see the world differently. The lines between what was real and what was a hallucination were blurring. I was seeing things in the shadows, hearing things in the silence. The growing paranoia was a constant companion, a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. Maria, the tough waitress, was the next to go. She had been the most vocal about the mountain curse, the most aware of the history of the place. She had an old-timer's knowledge, a repository of forgotten legends and half-remembered truths. She told me about a hidden cellar, a place below the keg rim that no one ever spoke about. That's where it keeps them, she'd said, her voice a low, frantic whisper. The ones who break the rules, the ones who see too much. She had a small, crude map, a piece of yellowed paper that she'd found tucked away in a corner of the kitchen. It showed a series of tunnels and hidden rooms beneath the bar. It's a network, she'd said, a spider's web. The tunnels, she explained, were for the cult, for the people who truly ran the place, the ones who served the thing in the mountains. I remember her face, illuminated by the dim light of a flickering match. She was terrified, but also strangely resolute. She was going to go down there, she told me, to find out what had happened to Sarah and Mr. Abernathy. She wanted to break the cycle, to expose the truth. I tried to talk her out of it. "You're walking into your grave, Maria," I said, but she just shook her head, her eyes filled with a desperate light. "Someone has to do it," she said. "Someone has to finish this." She was a martyr, a soldier going to a war she knew she couldn't win. The last thing she did was give me the map. "If I don't come back," she said, "you'll know what to do." And then she was gone, a ghost in the cold night, her footsteps swallowed by the silence of the snow. Her disappearance wasn't like the others. There was a struggle. We found traces of blood in the snow, a broken glass, and a few strands of her hair. It was a mess, a crude, violent scene that was a stark contrast to the clean disappearances before. The police came back, their faces grim. They found her body 2 days later, deep in the woods. It was a gruesome sight, but the report was strangely vague, as if the officers themselves were scared to put the full truth on paper. They said she'd fallen, that she'd hit her head on a rock, but I knew better. The marks on her body were not from a fall. They were from something with claws, something with a terrible strength. The newspaper that reported on her death was even more vague, a small, unassuming article that was quickly forgotten. The town had a way of burying its secrets. That night, I found an old audio cassette in her locker. It was labeled Interviews, 1995. I took it to the back office, the one place where I felt a little safe. I put it into an old cassette player, the kind that had been gathering dust on a shelf. The recording was full of static, but I could hear 2 voices. One was a police officer, his voice gruff and tired. The other was a woman, her voice trembling with fear. She was talking about a disappearance, a man who had gone into the woods and never come back. He was talking about a creature, she said, her voice a terrified whisper, a thing that looked like a shadow, but had hands. I heard the officer scoff. "Sounds like a bear, ma'am." But the woman insisted. "It wasn't a bear. It was a demon. It said my name." The recording ended with a scream. It was a trap. The entity had created this distorted memory to try and drive me insane. But in doing so, it had given me an inadvertent warning about its ability to manipulate time itself. The voice was a lie, but the scream was real. It was Maria's scream, but the date on the cassette was from years before she was even born. The 5th rule was the one that made the least sense to me at first. Do not bring in anything that reminds you of home. The rule was a strange one, a peculiar quirk in a place filled with them. But after finding the cassette, after seeing the distorted reality of that place, it started to make a terrifying kind of sense. The entity, this shifting thing in the mountains, was not just a predator. It was a parasite. It fed on memories, on personal connections, on the very idea of a life outside the whispering pine. My old college ID, a small, faded photo of my sister, a worn-out medallion. These were not just objects. They were anchors to my reality, and the entity was trying to cut them loose. I had always kept a small, old toy car in my pocket, a relic from my childhood, a tangible link to a time before I was Tom, the broke security guard. It was a small, plastic monster truck, the same kind as in the photo of the missing boy, Daniel Carter. I didn't know why I carried it. Maybe it was a subconscious need to hold on to a simpler time. But now, after what I'd heard on the cassette, after what I'd seen with Mrs. Albright, I realized it was a vulnerability, a chink in my armor. It was an invitation for the thing to get inside my head, to twist my past into a new horror. I started to feel its influence more and more. The bar was no longer just a bar. It was a labyrinth, a psychological trap. I would walk into a room and it would feel wrong, subtly different. A chair would be in the wrong place. A painting would be slightly crooked, The scent of fresh pine would be replaced with the sickening smell of damp earth and rot. I found myself checking my reflection in the mirror, half expecting to see a stranger's face staring back at me. I was losing my grip on reality, my mind a battleground for a war I didn't understand. I went to Leo, the last of the original staff. He was a wreck, his face pale, his hand shaking as he poured drinks. He'd seen Maria's body, the official report, and the look of utter fear on her face. He was in a state of growing terror, a silent scream trapped behind his eyes. I told him about the tunnels, about the cult, about the shape-shifting entity. He didn't scoff. He didn't laugh. He just stared at me, a profound look of understanding on his face. "They're not people, Tom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They're reflections. They're echoes." He pointed to a man sitting by the fireplace, a silent, shadowy figure I'd seen 100 times before. "That's not Mr. Abernathy," Leo said. "That's what's left of him." The man was a silent parody, a twisted mirror image, a puppet on a string. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The rules weren't for the entity. They were a guide for us, a set of instructions to navigate the shifting reality of the place without becoming a part of it. The patrons were not just wealthy tourists. Some of them were the victims, twisted into grotesque imitations of themselves, their memories and identities consumed by the thing. The cult wasn't an organization. It was the staff, the previous generations of employees, who had become a part of the horror, who had learned to serve the entity in order to survive. They weren't serving the bar. They were serving the mountain itself. They had made a deal with the devil, and the Whispering Pine was the price. The staff must follow 7 sacred rules, and breaking even one means death. I had broken at least 2. I had looked too long into Mrs. Albright's eyes, and I had brought a piece of my past into a place that had no room for it. The 6th rule was the one I learned about from a set of faded, handwritten notes I found in Silas's office. Never trust the reflections. It was a cryptic instruction, a warning that made little sense until I saw Leo, the last surviving member of the original staff, staring at his reflection in the polished surface of the bar. He wasn't just looking at himself, he was looking at something else, a fleeting, distorted image that was not his own. The fear in his eyes was a raw, primal thing, a terror that went beyond words. "It's inside," he whispered, his voice a broken thing. "It's in the mirror." The bar was becoming a house of mirrors, a fun house of horrors, where reality was constantly shifting. I saw my own reflection distorting, my face stretching and twisting into a grotesque parody of itself. I saw the faces of the missing in the shadows, their features melting and shifting like wax. I was losing my mind, but I was also getting closer to the truth. The entity wasn't just shape-shifting to appear as a patron, it was inhabiting the patrons, becoming a distorted reflection of their fears and desires. And the rules were not just a way to keep it at bay. They were a set of rituals, a twisted form of etiquette that the cult, the previous staff, had developed to appease the thing. I found another document in the archives, a tattered old journal with the name Silas written on the cover. It wasn't the grim, cold Silas I knew. This was an older Silas, a man who had once been a new security guard just like me. This journal was a descent into madness, a chilling account of his first few months at the Whispering Pine. He wrote about the disappearances, about the rules, about the growing sense of dread that had consumed him. He wrote about the thing in the mountains, a shifting darkness that fed on identities. He wrote about the cult, a group of keepers who had made a deal with the entity. The deal was simple. The keepers would provide it with a steady supply of victims, people who broke the rules, and in return, the entity would let the keepers live. A footnote, scribbled in a different hand, hinted at the true nature of the keepers. The role is passed down. One must find a successor before the mountain claims them. The journal entry that chilled me to the bone was about the sixth rule. The reflections are its eyes, he wrote, his handwriting a frantic, illegible scrawl. It watches through the mirrors, through the water, through the glass. It sees everything, and once it has a hold of you, once it sees your fear, it becomes you. Silas had become one of the keepers, a part of the horror. He had given up his own identity, his own soul, to a monstrous thing in the woods. His cold indifference was not a personality trait. It was a mask, a protective shell. He had become a reflection, an echo of the man he once was. The journal also contained a small, crudely drawn map, a more detailed version of the one Maria had given me. It showed the tunnels, the hidden rooms, and a place labeled the Heart. It was a room below the keg room, a place where the entity lived, where it kept the memories and identities of its victims. It was a place of power, a place where the rules were forged. I had to go there. I had to go down into the darkness and confront the source of the horror. I had to break the final rule. I had to go inside. I looked at Leo, the last of my colleagues. He was a shell of the person he used to be, a ghost in his own life. He was staring at the keg room door, his eyes wide with a terrible understanding. "It's in there," he whispered, his voice a strangled sound. "It's waiting." I knew he was right. I had to go. I had to go down into the heart of the darkness and face the truth. But I had one thing he didn't. A piece of my past, my small, plastic monster truck. It was my anchor, and it was going to be my weapon. I wasn't just going to break the rules. I was going to break the cycle. I was going to get out of this place, or I was going to die trying. The seventh and final rule was the most sinister of all. Never look at what's behind the keg room door. It wasn't just a locked door. It was a sealed tomb, a gate to a place that everyone in the bar, staff and patrons alike, pretended didn't exist. I had the two maps, the one from Maria and the one from old Silas's journal, and they both led to the same place. I knew what I had to do. I had to go into the heart of the horror, the place where the entity lived. The bar was closing, the last of the patrons shuffling out into the night, their faces a blank canvas of expensive indifference. Leo was gone too. I didn't see him leave, but his apron was gone from its hook, and his locker was empty. He had become another echo. I was alone now, the last man standing in a place of ghosts. The air in the bar was heavy, thick with the scent of stale beer and old secrets. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerators and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I went to the keg room, the cold steel door, a silent promise of the horrors within. The key, an old tarnished brass thing that Silas had given me when I first started, felt heavy in my hand. He had told me it was a spare, but I knew better. It was a key to a prison, and I was about to unlock my own cell. I put the key in the lock, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of my hand. The lock turned with a soft metallic click, a sound that echoed in the profound silence of the bar. The door swung open, and a blast of cold, damp air hit me, smelling of wet earth and something else, something metallic and rotten. It was the smell of a crypt, a grave. I stepped inside, the light from the bar spilling into the darkness, illuminating a narrow set of stone stairs leading down into the earth. The air was thick with a psychic static, a low thrumming that was not a sound, but a feeling. It was a feeling of profound wrongness, of a place that was not meant to exist. My small plastic monster truck, the relic from my past, felt like a burning ember in my pocket, a small anchor in a sea of madness. I knew I couldn't go back. I had broken the last rule, and there was no turning back. As I descended the stairs, I heard the voices. They weren't from the living. They were echoes, fragments of the people who had gone missing. I heard Mr. Abernathy's voice, a soft, polite whisper about a book he was reading. I heard Sarah's voice, a terrified plea for help. I heard Maria's voice, a frantic, desperate scream. They were all here, trapped in this place, their memories and identities consumed by the thing. The voices were a chorus of the damned, a symphony of 1,000 lost souls. I saw them in the shadows, their forms shifting and twisting, their faces a grotesque mockery of what they once were. They were the reflections, the echoes that Leo had warned me about. They were what was left of the people who had broken the rules. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my feet on cold, hard ground. The room was not a cellar. It was a vast, cavernous space, the walls lined with a pulsating organic material that was the color of old blood. In the center of the room was the entity. It wasn't a creature. It was a mass of shifting shadows, a vortex of distorted faces and half-formed bodies. It was the collective consciousness of 1,000 lost souls, a parasitic entity that had taken up residence in the mountain. I saw my own reflection in its swirling depths, my face twisting into a silent scream. It was reaching for me, its shadowy tendrils stretching out, ready to consume me, to make me a part of its monstrous whole. But I was ready. I had my anchor, I had my piece of the past, and I had a story to tell. I was standing in the heart of the monster, my small plastic monster truck, a burning ember in my hand. The entity, a swirling vortex of shadows and lost faces, was before me, its tendrils reaching out, ready to consume me, to make me a part of its monstrous whole. But I was ready. I had my anchor, a piece of my past that this thing couldn't touch. I held up the toy car, the cheap plastic, a beacon of light in the profound darkness. "This is a part of me," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "This is a memory. This is a life you can't take." The entity shrieked, a sound that was not a sound, but a psychic assault on my mind. The faces in the vortex contorted in agony, their silent screams a symphony of 1,000 lost souls. The room pulsed with a terrible energy, the walls shifting and twisting, the smell of rot and old blood overwhelming my senses. The entity was trying to get inside my head, to twist my memory of the toy car into a new horror, to make it a part of its monstrous whole. It showed me a vision, a distorted parody of my childhood. I saw myself as a small boy, my face twisted into a mask of pure terror, the monster truck a symbol of my own lost innocence. It was a lie, a fabricated memory, designed to break me, to make me doubt my own reality. But I held on to the truth. "You can't have it," I said, my voice a defiant roar in the darkness. "You can't have me." I knew what I had to do. The entity was a parasite, a thing that fed on memories and identities. But what if it had a core? What if there was a single, vulnerable point, a piece of the original host that was still alive? The journal entries had been clear. The entity was not just a creature. It was a collective consciousness, a hive mind of 1,000 lost souls. And then I saw it. It was a small, pale face, a face of a young woman with a look of profound terror on her face. Her name was Eleanor Vance. I recognized her from the old police report, the socialite who had gone missing 10 years ago. Her face was not distorted. It was whole, a single tiny point of light in the sea of darkness. She was the core, the original host, the one who had started the cycle. Her eyes, filled with a deep, ancient terror, met mine, but in them I saw a flicker of something else, a spark of recognition, a profound sadness. My small, plastic monster truck, a symbol of my own lost childhood, seemed to connect with a buried memory in her, a sliver of her own past that the monster hadn't consumed. It was enough. I took out my knife, a small cheap thing I use for cutting boxes, and I plunged it into the pulsating organic wall of the cavern. The entity shrieked again, a sound of pure agony. The wall recoiled, and a stream of thick black liquid, smelling of old blood and bile, poured out. I saw the faces in the vortex contort in even more pain. I was hurting it. I was hurting the core. I kept stabbing, my hands a frantic blur, the knife a small insignificant weapon against a monstrous god. But every stab was a prayer, a defiance against a world that had tried to consume me. The room was shaking now, the cavern walls groaning and shifting. The vortex was shrinking, the faces of the lost souls fading away, their silent screams finally silenced. I was winning. I was actually winning. And then I felt it. The entity's tendrils, the shadows of 1,000 lost hands, wrapped around my ankle. It was pulling me in, a desperate final attempt to consume me. My anchor, my plastic monster truck, fell from my hand, clattering on the cold stone floor. I was losing. I was going to become another face in the vortex, another ghost in the machine. But then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was a cold hand, a hand that was not of this world. I looked up. It was Eleanor Vance. Her face was no longer terrified. It was serene, a look of profound peace on her face. She was a ghost, a remnant, but she was also a warrior. She looked at me, a silent message passing between us. "I'm sorry," she seemed to say, "but you have to let go." And then she pushed me away from the vortex, a final desperate act of defiance. The last thing I saw was her face, a single flickering light, before the vortex consumed her once more. And then, with a final terrible shriek, it was gone. The silence that followed was a heavy thing, a profound, absolute silence that was more terrifying than the screams. The cave was no longer a cavern of horrors. It was just a cold stone room, the walls slick with the black, oily substance that had poured from the entity. The smell was still there, the scent of a grave, a crypt, but the feeling of profound wrongness was gone. The entity was gone. The cycle was broken. I had done it. I had survived. I had made it out of the labyrinth. I stumbled out of the keg room, my body a mass of bruises and exhaustion, my mind a fractured thing. The bar was silent, the music a phantom limb that no longer ached. The patrons were gone, their ghosts finally laid to rest. The staff were gone, their echoes silenced. I was alone, a sole survivor in a place of death. I looked out the window, at the vast, silent expanse of the snow-dusted mountains. The sun was rising, a beautiful ethereal light that bathed the world in a profound, golden glow. It was a new day, a new beginning, but I was not the same person who had walked into that place. I was a man who had stared into the heart of darkness, and I had come back with a story to tell. I had lost my job, my sanity, and a piece of my soul, but I had the truth. So, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone you think might understand, because the mountains have a way of keeping secrets, and sometimes the only way to escape the darkness is to bring it into the light.